the morning of July 25th, 1944. The air above the hedgerows west of St. Lo, Normandy, still carried the lingering coolness of dawn, a mist gently caressing the war-torn landscape. For General Lieutenant Fritz Boehm, commanding a panzer division, the silence that descended at 0937 hours was not a welcome reprieve, but a chilling premonition. 6 brutal weeks had passed since D-Day, a relentless symphony of American harassment fire having become the grim soundtrack to their existence. The sudden cessation of this constant barrage, the abrupt, almost unnatural quiet, was far more unsettling than any sustained shelling could have been. It felt like the world was holding its breath, poised on the precipice of something utterly unknown. Imagine the German veterans, many seasoned survivors of Rommel's legendary Afrika Korps, digging into their positions along the Saint-Lô-Perrier road. These were men who had faced the earth-shattering barrages of Soviet artillery, an experience so visceral it seemed to shake the very ground beneath their feet. They had endured the methodical, grinding precision of British artillery at El Alamein, a test of will and endurance unlike any other. They considered themselves hardened, their understanding of artillery, and indeed of warfare itself, forged in the crucible of countless battles across continents. Yet nothing, absolutely nothing in their extensive and brutal experience had prepared them for the apocalyptic minute that was about to unfold at 0938. At that precise moment, the world didn't just hold its breath, it exploded. Over 1,000 American artillery pieces scattered across miles of the Norman countryside discharged their payloads in a single, coordinated, earth-shattering instant. This was no sequential firing, no gradual, creeping, rolling barrage that military doctrine had dictated for decades, the kind of predictable pattern that allowed for a fleeting moment of preparation, a fractional second of psychological bracing. No, this was an instantaneous, simultaneous cataclysm. Shells, fired from vastly different distances, some from 6 miles away, others from a staggering 15, had been meticulously calculated, their trajectories plotted with almost unbelievable precision to arrive at their targets at the exact same terrifying instant. The sheer technological and mathematical mastery on display was, frankly, revolutionary. Light 105mm howitzers, medium 155mm guns, heavy 8-inch howitzers, and even gargantuan 240mm batteries, each with its unique ballistic characteristics and operational range, all contributed to this singular, devastating moment of impact. Artillery officers from any previous war, even those of the First World War who had seen the massed horrors of industrial-scale shelling, would have deemed such mathematical precision utterly impossible. This wasn't just about throwing a lot of metal at the enemy. It was about orchestrating a symphony of destruction, a ballistic ballet where every instrument hit its note at the exact, predetermined second. Consider the immense complexity involved. A relatively small 105mm shell, fired at a high angle to maximize range, might take around 23 seconds to reach its target. Meanwhile, a larger 150mm long tom gun, positioned much farther back, could see its shell in flight for 31 seconds or more. To ensure unified arrival, the fire commands had to be staggered backward in time from the desired moment of impact. Each battery received its precise firing time, a perfectly calculated second, ensuring that despite varying distances and shell velocities, every single round landed simultaneously. This was not just military science, it was an application of advanced physics and mathematics on a scale never before witnessed in combat. It signified a profound shift in thinking, moving beyond brute force to a new paradigm where timing, precision, and coordination were paramount. The American artillery was not just firing. It was performing a highly synchronized, deadly dance. What the German defenders were about to experience was far more than a mere artillery barrage. It was a visceral, terrifying demonstration of American industrial coordination and mathematical precision, flawlessly applied to the ancient science of warfare. It was a synthesis of emerging technology, robust communication networks, and unparalleled organizational capability. This single, overwhelming strike wouldn't just shatter German defensive positions. It would utterly dismantle their fundamental understanding of how wars were fought. It was the thunder of a new era, echoing the unstoppable force of American industrial might, brought to bear on the battlefield with devastating effect. The very concept of battlefield resilience, of weathering a storm, was being redefined in the most brutal way imaginable. To truly grasp the revolutionary nature of this time-on-target, TOT artillery, one must first understand the prevailing artillery doctrine of 1944. For centuries, artillery had adhered to predictable, established patterns, from the grand batteries of Napoleon, where guns were massed and fired in sequence to overwhelm specific points, to the World War I rolling barrages that walked ahead of advancing infantry at predetermined rates. The emphasis was on sustained, if somewhat generalized, pressure. These methods, while effective in their own right, allowed for a certain degree of psychological adjustment, a frantic dash for cover, a moment to brace. They were predictable, almost ritualistic in their unfolding. The Germans, masters of tactical innovation in their own right, had refined their doctrine of concentrated fire, or Schwerpunkt, focusing overwhelming force at decisive points to achieve rapid breakthroughs. Their artillery doctrine, honed through lightning victories in Poland, France, and the early, stunning successes of the Russian campaign, emphasized rapid concentration and swift displacement. German forward observers, vorgeschobene Beobachter, working in close coordination with individual battery commanders, could bring accurate fire on targets within minutes, a capability they prided themselves on. The Wehrmacht, indeed, enjoyed a reputation for flexibility and speed in their artillery operations, an assessment that wasn't entirely unfounded based on early encounters. American artillery in North Africa, for instance, had initially struggled with coordination, famously failing to concentrate fire effectively at the Kasserine Pass, a painful lesson that spurred critical self-assessment and rapid adaptation. But German officers, despite their tactical prowess, had critically missed something vital. The Americans were not merely learning, they were profoundly adapting, applying advanced industrial management principles, the very ethos of efficiency, standardization, and systems thinking that underpinned their economic might, to the venerable ancient art of artillery. The development of time on target represented a fundamental paradigm-shifting change in thinking. Rather than viewing artillery as a collection of individual batteries supporting local units, American planners conceived of artillery as a holistic system, an interconnected, coordinated network capable of delivering overwhelming force at precise, chosen moments. It was less about individual prowess and more about systemic superiority, a triumph of organization over fragmented effort. This was akin to moving from a craftsman's workshop to a modern factory floor, where every component, every process, was optimized for a singular, potent output. The unprecedented ability to execute time-on-target barrages required the simultaneous development and interconnected application of four crucial technological and organizational innovations, elements that the Germans, in their tactical and doctrinal focus, had not fully grasped, let alone integrated. The first of these was the revolutionary Forward Observer, FO system. Unlike their German counterparts, the Vorgeschobene Beobachter, who typically worked in direct support of single batteries, American forward observers possessed the incredible capability to call upon entire artillery groups, even corps-level assets, vastly expanding their reach and destructive potential. Each FO was equipped with state-of-the-art radio communication, initially the SCR-619, later upgraded to the more robust SCR-610. These radios provided reliable, secure, and instantaneous communication to the Fire Direction Centers, FDCs, located miles behind the front lines, a crucial link in the chain of precision. The SCR-619, detailed in Technical Manual 11619 from April 1945, operated on FM frequencies between 27 and 38, 9 MHz, offering a significant leap in battlefield communications. The SCR-610, standardized earlier on September 29, 1941, was even more powerful, providing 20 to 32 watts of output with a reliable 5-mile range. This meant an FO wasn't just eyes on the target. They were the remote trigger for an entire orchestral strike force, an almost unheard-of level of control and destructive potential from the front lines. The ability to directly communicate and coordinate fire from such a vast network, from the forward edge of the battle all the way back to command centers, was a true game-changer, shattering the traditional limitations of direct line-of-sight communication or slow, laborious message relays. The second critical innovation was the Fire Direction Center, or FDC. This concept, pioneered at Fort Sill in the 1930s during peacetime exercises, was perfected in the crucible of actual combat. The FDC wasn't just a command post, it was essentially a mathematical calculating hub, a nexus of precision. Here, highly trained personnel, often former mathematicians or engineers, utilized complex firing tables, precision slide rules, and specialized graphical firing boards to compute firing solutions for multiple batteries concurrently. This simultaneous calculation was key. Instead of each battery calculating its own trajectory, the FDC acted as a central brain, processing a massive amount of data, target coordinates, weather conditions, gun types, ammunition characteristics, and then issuing precise, staggered firing commands to ensure that all shells arrived together. This centralized control and computational power removed individual battery guesswork and dramatically increased the speed and accuracy of massed fire. It was the embodiment of systems thinking applied to the battlefield, turning what was once a series of independent actions into a single, cohesive, devastating event. The FDC represented a shift from artisanal warfare to industrialized scientific warfare. The third element, often overlooked but absolutely vital, was the communication infrastructure. The Americans laid telephone wire with an intensity that can only be described as manic. A single infantry division, for instance, might deploy an astonishing 3,000 miles of telephone wire in a mere month of combat. These redundant and robust communication networks were not a luxury, but a fundamental necessity. They ensured that fire missions, calculated with painstaking precision at the FDCs, could be transmitted instantly and reliably to dozens of scattered batteries. This web of communication meant that even if one line went down, another would be available, ensuring uninterrupted coordination. It spoke volumes about the American commitment to establishing an unshakable backbone for their advanced artillery operations, prioritizing connectivity as much as firepower itself. The sheer scale of this logistical effort, the hundreds of miles of cable, the thousands of linemen, truly underscores the depth of their commitment to making TOT work, transcending mere tactical theory into practical, operational reality. And finally, the fourth, and perhaps most underappreciated element was standardization. This was a direct reflection of American industrial prowess. American ammunition, from a simple 105mm shell to the massive 200mm projectile, was manufactured to exacting, consistent specifications in factories stretching from the industrial heartlands of Pennsylvania to the vast expanses of California. This meant that a 105mm shell fired from any howitzer, regardless of its specific manufacturing plant, would have predictable and identical ballistic characteristics. There was no guesswork, no need for individual recalibration based on ammunition batch. German ammunition, by contrast, increasingly suffered from quality inconsistencies, often produced by slave labor in dispersed, vulnerable facilities, leading to variations in propellant quality and shell weight that made precise, synchronized calculations incredibly difficult, if not impossible. This standardization was the silent enabler, the fundamental building block upon which the entire complex edifice of time on target was constructed. It was the unsung hero, ensuring that the theoretical calculations of the FDC translated into real-world synchronized devastation on the battlefield. Without it, the mathematical precision would have been meaningless. The Germans first encountered limited time on target techniques in Italy during early 1944. However, in a tragic miscalculation, many German officers dismissed these initial demonstrations as nothing more than lucky coincidences or isolated instances of effective but unplanned concentrated fire, rather than recognizing them as deliberate, emerging tactics. They failed to perceive the ominous pattern. The concentrated firepower achieved during the Anzio breakout on May 23, 1944, provided the first large-scale demonstration that truly captured German attention, or at least should have. 16 battalions of artillery, comprising over 200 guns, delivered devastatingly coordinated fire on German positions along the Caesar Line. By this point, the technique had been refined through months of intensive practice. The 9th Infantry Division, for example, had conducted experimental TOT barrages in Sicily, meticulously documenting and refining the process. The 1st Infantry Division had further improved the technique during its arduous campaigns in Italy. By D-Day, TOT was rapidly becoming standard doctrine throughout the American Expeditionary Forces, a fundamental shift in their approach to artillery. Yet, tragically for the Germans, their intelligence services, perhaps blinded by preconceived notions of American tactical inferiority, or simply overwhelmed by the scale of Allied operations, dismissed early reports as mere exaggerations. This underestimation would cost them dearly. July 25, 1944, the date burned into the memory of every German soldier caught in its hellish embrace, marked the beginning of Operation Cobra and the full, terrifying unveiling of American time-on-target capabilities. General Omar Bradley, a master of logistics and strategy, had assembled the largest artillery force ever concentrated by the U.S. Army in Europe. This wasn't just a large number of guns. It was an unprecedented orchestration of firepower. over 1,000 tubes, ranging from the nimble 105mm howitzers to the formidable 8-inch guns, including 22 guns from the 7th and 8th Corps alone, were supplemented by 4.2-inch mortars and even tank destroyers repurposed to fire as indirect artillery. The designated target area was a rectangle roughly 7,000 yards wide and 2,500 yards deep, situated just south of the Saint-Lô-Perrier Road. Within this tightly defined box lay the bulk of the German Panzer Lehr Division and elements of the 5th Parachute Division, approximately 5,000 battle-hardened combat troops, entrenched in what they believed were fortified positions, ready to repel any attack. At 0938, a moment that would forever be etched in military history, the ground beneath those German defenders, already stunned and disoriented by a preceding carpet-bombing run from heavy bombers, erupted. Every single American gun fired. The shells, launched from distances varying wildly from 5,000 to 25,000 yards, converged on their targets with a horrifying, coordinated singularity of destruction. To put the scale into perspective, the U.S. Army had allocated a staggering 170,000 artillery shells specifically for Operation Cobra, 140,000 for the 7th Corps, and 27,000 for the 8th Corps. This was not just a concentration of firepower, it was an industrial-scale expenditure of ordnance designed to utterly pulverize the enemy. The initial barrage was not a one-off event. It was followed by a series of precise intervals, successive time-on-target concentrations that systematically walked through the German positions, relentlessly grinding them into dust. Then, as abruptly as it began, silence descended once more. A silence that was infinitely more terrifying than the preceding thunder. Into this eerie quiet, the American infantry advanced. What they found was not a resilient defensive line, but a landscape of utter devastation. The Panzer Lehr, which had entered Normandy with 14,000 men and 190 tanks, effectively ceased to exist as a coherent fighting division. General Fritz Boehm, surveying the horrific aftermath, reported to Field Marshal Günther von Kluge with an assessment that would become legendary in its stark, chilling realism. My front lines look like the face of the moon, and at least 70% of my troops are out of action, dead, wounded, crazed, or numbed. This wasn't just a defeat. It was an annihilation, a psychological and physical rupture that few could have imagined. What the German High Command, and indeed many of their experienced artillery officers, couldn't fully comprehend was the profound mathematical precision underpinning time on target. This was not simply about massing a large number of guns and firing them indiscriminately. It was about solving incredibly complex ballistic equations in real time, under battlefield conditions, with staggering accuracy. Let's break down the almost unfathomable problem presented to those FDCs. To ensure shells from different guns, firing from different locations, arrived at precisely the same instant, required knowledge of an astounding array of variables. The exact geographical location of each individual battery. Precision down to a few meters. The precise distance to the target. Measured accurately across varying terrains. The specific muzzle velocity of each gun type. This could vary slightly between individual guns, even of the same model, and was affected by barrel wear. The weight and aerodynamic characteristics of each shell type. Different shells, even of the same caliber, had distinct flight properties. Wind speed and direction at various altitudes. a critical, constantly changing variable that could significantly alter a shell's trajectory. Air, temperature, and density. Affecting drag and lift. The Coriolis effect for long-range fire. The subtle yet measurable deflection caused by the Earth's rotation. Powder temperature, which directly impacted the propellant's burn rate and thus muzzle velocity. The Americans had developed sophisticated graphical computation tools, notably the Graphical Firing Table, GFT, and the Graphical Sight Table, GST. These innovations allowed for the rapid calculation of these complex problems, transforming what would have been hours of manual, individual calculations into minutes of coordinated, centralized data processing. German artillery, still relying on conventional firing tables and laborious individual battery calculations, simply couldn't match this speed or integrated precision. Their methods, while robust for traditional barrages, were utterly outmatched by this new computational warfare. It was the difference between using an abacus and an early mainframe computer. The ability to execute time on target was intrinsically linked to a communication network that dwarfed anything the Germans had ever encountered, or could even imagine. By July 1944, a typical American infantry division operating in Normandy possessed and operated more radio sets than an entire German corps had in 1940. Think about that for a moment. One division versus an entire corps. This disparity highlights the fundamental difference in logistical and industrial priorities. The U.S. 1st Infantry Division alone, for instance, operated over 900 radio sets by August 1944, a mind-boggling number. Every American artillery battery had multiple redundant communication systems, reliable wire lines, robust radio links, and even traditional messenger services as a fail-safe. Fire direction centers maintained direct, open lines to every battery, every forward observer, and higher headquarters. This communication superiority enabled something the Germans found almost incomprehensible: the ability to mass dispersed artillery instantly. American batteries didn't need to be physically concentrated in a vulnerable position to achieve a concentrated effect. Guns spread over 20 miles of front could simultaneously deliver their shells to a single, precise point, presenting an enemy with overwhelming fire from seemingly nowhere. This shattered the tactical advantage of camouflage and dispersion. The Americans could achieve massed effects without massing their guns. What German officers slowly, painfully began to understand was that time on target represented more than just a tactical innovation. It was a profound manifestation of American industrial and organizational capability applied directly to warfare. The same principles that enabled the vast automobile factories of Detroit to churn out a bomber every hour were now being applied to the synchronization of hundreds of artillery pieces. The standardization that made TOT possible extended throughout American military production. Every 105mm howitzer, whether manufactured by the Rock Island Arsenal or the Watervliet Arsenal, possessed identical ballistic characteristics. Every shell, whether produced in the factories of Pennsylvania or the munitions plants of Missouri, met exact, unvarying specifications. This rigorous standardization, achieved through advanced mass production techniques, was the bedrock that enabled the incredibly precise calculations required for TOT. German production, increasingly disrupted by relentless Allied bombing campaigns and reliant on dispersed manufacturing facilities, often staffed by forced or slave labor, simply couldn't achieve such consistency. Their shells and guns, even of the same type, might vary subtly in performance, introducing variables that made the American level of precision impossible to replicate. The American ability to mass-produce not just weapons but trained personnel also astounded German military professionals. The U.S. Army's Fire Direction Center training program at Fort Sill, the primary artillery training center, graduated thousands of highly qualified FDC personnel throughout the war. They approached military education like factory production, standardized, efficient, and scalable. The German counteroffensive at Mortain, launched on August 7, 1944, provided a devastating defensive demonstration of American TOT capabilities. Hitler, in a desperate gamble, had ordered a massive counterattack to sever the American breakthrough, committing the rebuilt 2nd SS Panzer Division, 1st SS Panzer Division, and 116th Panzer Division. As German armor concentrated for the attack, American forward observers, often perched precariously on vantage points like Hill 317, watched the buildup. When the German assault began under the cover of midnight, they immediately called for TOT missions on pre-registered coordinates. The effect was horrifyingly efficient. The U.S. 2nd Infantry Division alone fired up to 20 TOT barrages a night. According to official after-action reports from Hill 192, the American 30th Infantry Division, though significantly outnumbered by the attacking German forces, called in TOT missions from 7 separate artillery battalions throughout the night. Each mission delivered instantaneous devastation on German assembly areas, their approach routes, and crucial command posts. The concentrated firepower created what German survivors vividly described as solid walls of hot steel that made any advance utterly impossible. By dawn, the German attack had stalled, decisively broken by unseen, overwhelming fire. Field Marshal von Kluge reported to Hitler that continuation of the offensive was impossible against such overwhelming artillery superiority. The routine execution of TOT missions represented a remarkable training achievement. The U.S. Army had transformed millions of civilians into skilled practitioners of a complex military science in less than 3 years. At Fort Sill, the Field Artillery School developed an intensive program that compressed decades of artillery science into a mere 17 weeks. Students immersed themselves in ballistics, meteorology, survey techniques, and advanced communications. But, most importantly, they were rigorously trained to think of artillery as an integrated system, rather than a collection of individual guns. The training emphasized practical application over abstract theory. Students performed thousands of simulated fire missions, calculating TOT solutions until the entire process became second nature, a complex choreography of numbers and timing. By graduation, a competent FDC team could calculate a 10-battery TOT mission in under 180 seconds, 3 minutes. This mass production of technical expertise utterly astounded German professionals who encountered it. The Americans trained more fire direction specialists in 3 years than Germany had produced in decades, a testament to their industrial approach to military education. The execution of time on target required not just unparalleled skill and training, but overwhelming material resources. A single TOT mission might expend more ammunition than a German division received in an entire month. During Operation Cobra alone, American artillery fired over 170,000 rounds specifically allocated for the operation. The logistical system behind this was an unseen marvel, delivering thousands of tons of ammunition daily from the Normandy beaches directly to the battery positions. Trucks ran continuously, creating an unbroken chain of supply, a river of steel and propellant flowing relentlessly to the front. The quality of American ammunition consistently surpassed German expectations. Each shell was manufactured to exacting tolerances, with consistent propellant quality and precise weight distribution. This meticulous standardization was absolutely essential for the accurate time-of-flight calculations, fundamental to TOT. German ammunition, by stark contrast, exhibited increasing variability as production was dispersed and quality control deteriorated under wartime pressures. German artillery officers often had to test-fire new ammunition batches to determine their actual velocity and range, a time-consuming and imprecise process, while Americans could confidently assume their shells would perform exactly to specification. This seemingly mundane detail of manufacturing consistency was, in fact, a critical component of American dominance. One aspect of time on target that particularly impressed, and often terrified, German artillery officers was the American mastery of meteorological effects on ballistics. Accurate TOT required precise, up-to-the-minute knowledge of wind speeds at various altitudes, air pressure, temperature, and humidity. To achieve this, the Americans had deployed an extensive and sophisticated meteorological service. Every corps had dedicated weather sections taking readings every 30 minutes, a constant stream of atmospheric data. More impressively, they deployed radio sondes, weather balloons equipped with radio transmitters, that provided atmospheric data up to 30,000 feet. This critical information was immediately processed and distributed to all fire direction centers. This meticulous attention to constantly changing atmospheric conditions enabled American artillery to maintain astonishing accuracy even in rapidly changing weather, a capability far beyond their adversaries. During the brutal November offensive in the Hurtgen Forest, American TOT missions maintained their precision despite the thick fog, persistent rain, and highly variable winds that would have utterly disrupted German artillery. The Battle of the Hurtgen Forest, a meat grinder of a fight in dense woodland, further demonstrated that time on target could be devastatingly effective, even in terrain that Germans had previously considered artillery-proof. The Americans innovated tree-burst TOT missions, timing shells to detonate in the forest canopy, maximizing shrapnel effect, and eliminating the protection offered by foxholes. In November 1944, the 4th Infantry Division, fighting its way through the hellish forest, called for TOT missions using a mixture of high-explosive and white phosphorus shells. The coordinated tree bursts created what survivors described as instant hell, or wood splinters, driven downward like deadly spears, mixed with burning phosphorus that ignited the forest floor, trapping and incinerating defenders. The 28th Infantry Division, attacking towards Schmidt, used these barrages to clear German strongpoints embedded deep in the woods. One concentrated mission on November 6th involved 12 battalions firing into a mere 500-meter square area, delivering over 3,000 shells in just 30 seconds. German positions that had held for weeks were obliterated in half a minute. The dense woods, which usually muffled sound, meant shells arrived with even less warning than in open terrain. German medical services documented unprecedented rates of what they termed artillery-induced trauma among Hurtgen veterans. Soldiers who had remained functional after conventional bombardments, but were psychologically broken by the coordinated, instantaneous devastation of TOT, in the claustrophobic confines of the forest. The silent, sudden, overwhelming impact bypassed all normal coping mechanisms. The encirclement of German forces in the Falaise pocket in August 1944 provided arguably the most concentrated and devastating demonstration of time on target's effectiveness. As German units desperately struggled to escape through the narrowing gap, American artillery delivered continuous TOT missions on the escape routes, turning the corridors into charnel houses. On August 17th alone, American artillery executed documented TOT missions on the Falaise-Argentan road at 30-minute intervals throughout the daylight hours. Each mission involved 10 to 15 batteries delivering coordinated devastation on German columns attempting to flee the tightening noose. General Hans Eberbach, commanding the remnants of Panzer Group West, reported with chilling clarity. The concentrated artillery fire was so intense that it was impossible to bring up reserves or evacuate the wounded. Vehicle movement became suicide. The road through Falaise quickly became infamous as the Corridor of Death, choked with destroyed vehicles, dead horses, and abandoned equipment, creating obstacles that slowed movement and made subsequent units even more vulnerable to the relentless TOT strikes. By August 21st, when the pocket finally closed, a staggering 50,000 German soldiers had been captured, and another 10,000 killed, with artillery accounting for the vast majority of those casualties. This wasn't just a military victory. It was a testament to the industrial-scale destruction that TOT could unleash. As German forces retreated toward the Seine in late August, they discovered that even river crossings offered no respite from the relentless TOT barrages. American forward observers, often infiltrating far ahead of their main forces, established concealed positions overlooking every potential crossing site. At Vernon, Rouen, and Mantes, German attempts to establish pontoon bridges were met with immediate and precise TOT responses. The precision was such that bridges were destroyed while still under construction, often with engineer units still working on them, trapped in the lethal impact zone. This systematic destruction of crossing attempts through precisely timed artillery demonstrated the technique's incredible flexibility and responsiveness. Units began refusing to cross in daylight, creating massive traffic jams on the western banks of the rivers. Traffic jams that, in turn, became static, vulnerable targets for additional devastating TOT missions. It was a vicious, inescapable cycle of destruction. By December 1944, the Americans had integrated new technologies that made time on target even more devastating. The variable time, VT fuse, more commonly known as the proximity fuse, was first used in ground artillery during the Battle of the Bulge in December 1944. These revolutionary fuses detonated shells at an optimal height above the ground, maximizing fragment dispersion and creating a lethal rain of shrapnel. When VT-fused shells were incorporated into TOT barrages from December 1944 onward, the lethality increased dramatically. Shells detonating at an optimal height created a uniform pattern of destruction that no foxhole, no slit trench, no amount of digging could protect against. The psychological impact was immense. There was no safe place. Over 22 million proximity fuses were produced during the war, fundamentally transforming artillery effectiveness in the conflict's final, brutal months. The Germans initially believed the Americans had developed a completely new type of weapon, speculating wildly about controlled aerial mines or time-delay cluster munitions. The simple yet profound truth that it was merely precise timing combined with a clever fuse design. seemed almost too mundane for such devastating effect, a testament to their inability to fully grasp the American systematic approach. As American forces approached the Siegfried Line in September 1944, German commanders clung to the belief that their formidable fortifications would finally provide protection from the dreaded TOT barrages. The concrete bunkers and steel cupolas had been designed to withstand sustained artillery bombardment. However, the Americans once again innovated, developing specialized TOT missions specifically for attacking fortifications. By combining instantaneous impact, high-explosive shells with delayed fuse armor-piercing projectiles, they achieved both surface explosions to clear obstacles and penetrating impacts to breach hardened structures, all in unified, synchronized strikes. At Geilenkirchen in November, the 84th Infantry Division faced extensive Siegfried Line fortifications. The attacking units called for a TOT mission from 12 battalions, 144 guns, firing a perfectly calibrated mixture of ammunition types, shattering the illusion of invincibility. During the German Ardennes offensive in December 1944, the infamous Battle of the Bulge, time on target proved its immense defensive value. Though initially caught off guard by the surprise German thrust, American artillery units quickly recovered their composure and began delivering immediate TOT missions on German spearheads. On December 19th, as the 2nd Panzer Division approached Dinant, forward observers from the 3rd Armored Division called for emergency TOT support. Within a mere 4 minutes, 8 battalions had calculated firing solutions, a testament to their training and the FDC system. The resulting barrage caught the German column in march formation, destroying the lead battalion within 60 seconds. The ability to mass fires quickly through TOT proved absolutely crucial in containing German penetrations and preventing a complete breakthrough. At Bastogne, the surrounded American forces, facing overwhelming odds, famously called for TOT missions, danger close to their own positions, devastating German assault formations attempting to breach the perimeter. This willingness to call fire onto their own positions highlighted the extreme confidence they had in the precision of the TOT system and the desperate effectiveness required. As American forces approached the Rhine in March 1945, time on target reached its zenith of destructive capability. The monumental river crossing operations were supported by massive artillery concentrations, utilizing TOT principles on an unprecedented scale. At the Wesel crossing on March 24, 1945, the Allies concentrated a staggering 4,000 guns, with 270 American pieces participating in this colossal effort. The opening bombardment lasted a brutal 4 hours, featuring coordinated TOT strikes at 15-minute intervals. Each strike involved hundreds of guns achieving unified impact across kilometer-wide target areas. The scale was, quite simply, beyond anything previously conceived in warfare. In preparation for this single crossing, American artillery fired over 65,000 tons of ammunition in March 1945 alone. German defenders reported that the bombardment was so intensely powerful that the concussion alone caused casualties, with soldiers found dead without any visible wounds, their bodies shattered by the sheer force of the air. At Oppenheim, where Patton's Third Army crossed on March 22nd, the supporting TOT barrage involved 33 battalions, over 400 guns, firing in perfect coordination. The barrage lasted a mere 60 seconds, yet delivered 10,000 shells onto German positions, pulverizing them into oblivion. German commanders reported with horror that, entire battalions simply ceased to exist, with no survivors left even to report what had happened. It was a ghost army, vanished in an instant. What German officers gradually, agonizingly recognized was that time on target represented the application of American industrial methods to warfare, a profound philosophical shift. The same principles that enabled Detroit to produce a bomber every hour enabled American artillery to coordinate hundreds of guns with flawless precision. This industrial approach extended far beyond the battlefield. American factories produced artillery shells in staggering quantities, exceeding 8 million rounds monthly by late 1944. The vast transportation system, a marvel of logistics, delivered these shells from ports to firing batteries in a continuous, uninterrupted flow. Communication networks, a sprawling web of wire and radio, coordinated this vast enterprise with businesslike efficiency, a testament to American organizational genius. The psychological trauma inflicted by time on target extended far beyond immediate casualties. German medical services documented unprecedented rates of combat neurosis, specifically and unambiguously linked to the coordinated bombardment. Veterans who had endured hours-long Soviet barrages on the Eastern Front, men hardened by years of brutal trench warfare, were utterly broken by 30-second TOT bombardments. The instantaneous nature of the strikes removed all psychological coping mechanisms soldiers had developed. There was no escalation to prepare mentally, no rhythm to anticipate, no pattern to recognize. The terror was absolute and immediate. German field hospitals reported that soldiers experiencing multiple TOT barrages exhibited unique symptoms: paralysis triggered by sudden sounds, an inability to process multiple stimuli, and a profound existential fear of synchronicity itself. Unlike traditional shell shock, which might improve with rest, these symptoms often persisted, deeply ingrained, even after evacuation to rear areas, marking a new, more insidious form of psychological warfare. General Fritz Boehm's haunting assessment became the most quoted German description of the phenomenon. "My front lines look like the face of the moon, and at least 70% of my troops are out of action, dead, wounded, crazed, or numbed. All my forward tanks have been knocked out, and the roads are practically impossible." General Hans Eberbach provided crucial testimony, describing the sheer impossibility of resistance. The fire curtain was so dense that it was impossible to bring up reserves or to evacuate the wounded. The Americans have developed a system of artillery concentration that exceeds anything we imagined possible. Captured documents from Wehrmacht headquarters revealed desperate, almost frantic attempts to understand and counter American TOT capabilities. A weapons testing office report concluded with stark finality. American coordinated fire technique represents technological superiority in computational devices and communication integration. No effective countermeasure exists with current German capabilities. It was a concession of defeat, not just in firepower, but in ingenuity and industrial capacity. German attempts to replicate TOT techniques quickly revealed systemic, insurmountable disadvantages. They understood the underlying mathematics. They could, in theory, calculate time of flight. But they lacked everything else that made the American system functional and lethal: standardized ammunition, reliable and extensive communication networks, a massive pool of expertly trained personnel, and, fundamentally, the industrial foundation that made American coordinated fire possible on such a scale. German attempts at coordinated fire typically involved no more than 3 or 4 batteries and achieved only approximate simultaneity. The largest German attempt during the Nordwind offensive in January 1945 involved 8 batteries, but even then achieved an impact dispersion over 12 seconds. A lifetime on the battlefield, and a stark contrast to American precision. As American forces drove deeper into Germany in early 1945, time-on-target barrages became a routine preliminary to any attack, a signature of American offensive operations. At Cologne, the garrison commander surrendered after experiencing a single 60-second TOT barrage on March 5th, reporting that further resistance was militarily pointless against such overwhelming artillery superiority. The pattern repeated across the collapsing Reich. Commanders who had fought tenaciously for years, enduring unimaginable hardships, capitulated after brief but terrifying TOT bombardments. The psychological effect had become so pronounced that often the mere threat of coordinated fire was enough to prompt surrender, a weapon as powerful in its anticipation as in its execution. The very reputation of the instant thunder was enough to break wills. Soviet observers, despite being allies, studied American time-on-the-target techniques with intense interest, recognizing its profound implications for future conflicts. The British, long-standing masters of artillery themselves, were equally impressed. Field Marshal Montgomery, in his memoirs, famously wrote, "American time on target demonstrated that warfare had become a matter of industrial and organizational superiority. Traditional military virtues, courage, discipline, tactical skill, became secondary to the systematic application of overwhelming firepower." This was a stunning admission from a seasoned commander, highlighting the dawn of a new era. The German experience with TOT fundamentally influenced post-war military thinking. When the Bundeswehr, West Germany's armed forces, was established in 1955, coordinated fire's capability became a primary requirement for its artillery force, explicitly citing wartime experience with American TOT as the driving factor. The French Artillerie de l'Air revised its artillery curriculum based directly on German accounts and captured American manuals. The Israeli Defense Forces, IDF, established in 1948, incorporated TOT principles from the very beginning, advised by Jewish American veterans who had served in artillery units during World War II. NATO doctrine explicitly incorporated TOT principles, viewing coordinated fires as absolutely essential for defeating numerically superior Warsaw Pact forces, a doctrine that holds true to this day. General Johannes Steinhoff, a distinguished Luftwaffe fighter pilot who later served as NATO Military Committee chairman, stated definitively in 1968, "The lesson of American time on target is clear. Qualitative superiority in synchronization and coordination can defeat quantitative superiority in men and equipment." This encapsulates the enduring legacy of TOT. The computational methods developed for time on target also laid the crucial groundwork for modern military technologies. The graphical firing tables and rapid calculation methods pioneered by American artillery units were direct precursors to computerized fire control systems. The digital brains that now guide precision-guided munitions and orchestrate complex battlefield operations. The story of German forces encountering American time-on-target artillery marks a pivotal, transformative moment in military history. It was the moment when warfare, once largely viewed as an art practiced by warriors, irrevocably transformed into a science executed by sophisticated systems. German soldiers, products of what was widely considered the world's most professional and innovative military tradition, found themselves utterly overwhelmed, not by inherently superior individual soldiers, but by superior systems. The thunder that arrived without warning in Normandy represented far more than just American firepower. It embodied the emergence of a new form of warfare, one where victory belonged decisively to those who could best organize, integrate, and apply industrial power and mathematical precision to complex military problems. The German Wehrmacht was ultimately defeated, not by simply better soldiers, but by better systems. Not by superior courage alone, but by superior coordination. Not by tactical brilliance in isolation, but by industrial efficiency, applied with mathematical precision to the ancient art of artillery. American time on target shattered the entire conceptual framework of traditional military thinking. The coordinated thunder that fell on German positions from 1944 to 1945 wasn't just battlefield devastation. It was the resounding announcement of the arrival of a new age in warfare. An age where victory would belong to those who could best transform complex military operations into streamlined, efficient industrial processes. The echoes of that thunder still resonate powerfully in military doctrine worldwide. Every modern artillery system, every networked military force, every coordinated military operation owes a fundamental debt to the revolution that American time on target represented. The German soldiers who experienced it were unwilling, terrified witnesses to the birth of a new age in human conflict. An age where industrial mathematics, organizational prowess, and technological integration would prove infinitely more powerful and decisive than martial tradition or individual heroism alone. In the age of industrial warfare, a lesson was brutally carved into the battlefields of Europe. Organization triumphs over courage. Sophisticated systems decisively defeat individual soldiers, and coordinated timing conquers all. The Germans learned this indelible lesson under the instant, overwhelming thunder of American industrial warfare, made manifest in perfectly coordinated artillery fire. A lesson that transformed the very essence of warfare forever.